Welcome to another episode of the Lead to Win podcast. This week we visit with Kevin Palmieri, CFO, founder, and co-host of the Next Level University, a global top 100 self-improvement podcast about imposter syndrome and how leaders can deal with it. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. Let's get to work. We have a great show today as we visit with Kevin Palmieri. Kevin, welcome and thanks for coming on the Lead to Win podcast today.
Absolutely, my friend. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I appreciate your time, and I'm excited to talk about all things imposter syndrome and wherever else the conversation may go.
Awesome. So I've done a little bit of research, and I didn't want to mention too much of your story in a long bio. I wanted to kind of come from the horse's mouth per se. Just kind of tell me what has led you to where you are today and what have you been through? And, I noticed a little bit of resiliency in your story, and kind of tell my listeners what you're about and how you got here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad until I was 27 with the understanding that he was my dad. So obviously that's an interesting place to start, and that has molded me into the person you see in front of you. Other than that, childhood, pretty normal, all things considered. But there was not a lot of hope for my success. I don't think people would have bet on me to be a successful individual. In high school, I decided I didn't want to go to college. It just didn't make sense to me to go to college. I didn't want to put myself into debt to try to find what I wanted to do with my life. So I began a series of physical labor jobs. I started working as a gas station attendant. I was a forklift operator. I was a truck driver. I cleaned bathrooms and floors at a hospital, personal trainer, construction, many, many, many different things through my late teens and early 20s. And eventually I got this job, and I really want to paint a picture. I felt like I was really in trouble because here I am in my early 20s. I am working jobs that feel relatively dead end. I don't enjoy them. I'm not fulfilled. I'm miserable at every job I've ever worked at. And I'm having this realization that I may never make more than $15 an hour based on what I'm doing and where I'm at. I got this very unique opportunity in an industry called weatherization. So I went from making $15 an hour doing construction to $50 an hour on my first job for this weatherization company. And all weatherization is, for anybody who doesn't know, we would go into buildings and make them more energy efficient. Usually schools, fire stations, police stations. So I worked on state or government contracts. That's why I made good money. So if you looked at me in my early 20s, 23, 24, you would see someone who had a really high paying job. I was in really good shape. When I was 25, I did a bodybuilding show and I won my class. My girlfriend at the time was a model. I had a sports car. I had a new apartment. From the outside looking in, I was crushing it, and I was very, very successful. Internally, I was afraid of my own shadow. I was super insecure. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was a shell of a man, is probably the best way to put it. I was not what you would expect, for sure. So my girlfriend left me. I just was unable to support her. I was unable to pour into her dreams because I was really unable to support myself. When she left, I realized that I'm not ready to face these parts of me yet, I don't think. So I just need to go make as much money as humanly possible. Because if I make more money, the rest of the problems probably will just melt away eventually. Maybe I just didn't make enough yet. Maybe that's what the problem was. So the next year, I spent 10 months living on the road because all of our contracts were out of state. And I ended up making $100,000 that year. Got to the end of the year, and I remember having this moment when I was holding my final pay stub that I realized for most of my life, and especially that year, I had lived unconsciously. I had no idea why I was doing what I was doing, and it seemed like the reasoning was wrong. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So in 2017, I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. I fell in love with podcasting. As I fell out of love with my job, I've reached the pinnacle. I am not willing to do what it takes to get there again. So I start calling out, leaving the job site early, showing up late. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And every time I'd have to pack my bag to travel that week, I'd get anxiety and I was depressed and I was homesick. And all of that led to me waking up one morning in a hotel room in New Jersey, 6 hours from where I lived. My alarm clock went off at 5:15. I sat up. I slid to the edge of the bed. I was lacing up my work boots. And that morning, the best way to explain it, Bo, is there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And one is saying, you're stuck here forever. People like you do not get opportunities like this. Never mind, leave them behind. You're lucky. You're lucky, and you should stay here. If you ever did work up the courage to leave, what would your friends think? You have a lot of significance in the amount of money you make. What would your family think? You make more money than anybody in your family. And what are we going to do? I didn't have a plan A. This kind of was the plan B. I don't know if they give out plan Cs. I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing. Is this podcast really going to be a thing? So it was in that moment where I thought to myself, well, if I take my life, I'll just take my problems with me and I won't have to work through any of this and I won't even have to figure this out. I'm very blessed. I would say privileged. I'm very privileged to have the amazing humans I have in my life. And I reached out to one of them. He's now my business partner and the co-host of the show. And I said, Alan, I'm struggling, brother. I'm having these feelings, these thoughts, these emotions. I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do? And he said many different things, but in his wisdom, I remember him saying, your awareness has changed a ton, but your environments have remained the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So in 2018, I left my job and I went full-time into doing what we are doing today. Obviously, at the time, it wasn't this. I was broke for the next 2 years, couldn't afford Christmas presents for my wife, couldn't pay rent. Now we're 1,500 episodes in and global top 100 podcasts and all the quote unquote accolades. But let me tell you, the first few years were absolutely brutal. Just getting outside of my comfort zone every day, failing forward, overcoming imposter syndrome, all of that stuff. And I would say to a degree, I'm still dealing with imposter syndrome, depending, and I have stories about that I'm happy to dive into. So that's the short version of how we got from where we were to where we are today.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a good story when I was reading a little bit on your journey. So thanks for sharing that.
Of course, of course.
So as I mentioned earlier, the conversation today, which I'm really looking forward to, is about imposter syndrome. And I think, I want to think about imposter syndrome from a leader's perspective, somebody that leads people. So just tell me in a nutshell, what is imposter syndrome exactly?
Well, I think it shows up differently for everyone, but I would say imposter syndrome is the internal feeling you have when you do not feel like you belong doing what you're doing. You're afraid everybody is going to find out your weaknesses. You're afraid everybody is going to say, yeah, you shouldn't be doing it. You're right. You're not good enough, smart enough. It's almost like you end up in a position that you just do not believe you deserve or belong in. And I think that's probably the simplest blanket statement way to put it. And to your point, that can be in leadership, that can be in a relationship, that could be in anything. There's a million different ways imposter syndrome shows up for us all, but that would be the simple definition for me.
Yeah. So when we think about imposter syndrome, we kind of got an idea of what it is. Are there different types of imposter syndrome? And if there are, kind of tell us what you've seen or what you've experienced even in the past.
The ones that really showed up for me were the difference, the delta between what people thought of me and what I thought of myself. That was the biggest one. I would get off a speech. People would say, oh my goodness, you absolutely crushed it. But in my mind, I didn't do a very good job. Yes, maybe to you, you think I'm good, but there's people who are ahead of me that I think are probably looking down on me. So as an example, if you're a coach, your team, your athletes, they might say you're an amazing coach. But when you go out and you hang out with coaches who have more tenure than you and more years and more experience and more wins, you might have imposter syndrome of saying, well, I don't really have that much credibility here. I don't have that much expertise. That's a big one. I also find that if you live in two worlds, so as an example, I'm going to jujitsu. I'm a huge martial arts fan, did jujitsu years ago, just got back into it. When I'm with my friends, I am the jujitsu expert. When I'm at the gym, I am getting smashed by everyone. So if I'm going to have imposter syndrome, it's going to be in that second one when I'm around the people who are way better than me. So those are the ones that I've seen. I think the biggest thing in the lesson that will really guide through this entire episode is action is the cure-all. Imposter syndrome is usually fear that we are what we think we are, unfortunately. If we don't take action, that proves to us that we're not good enough in the first place. So I had this happen to me recently. I was getting ready to go on a podcast. And just like I did with you, I do research. Okay. This many episodes, this is what they talk about. Cool. All right, awesome. And in my research, I realized the person that was hosting the podcast was a doctor for NASA. So this is a space doctor. And here I am. I didn't go to college. I don't feel like I know anything. I do not feel smart enough. And I remember thinking, Bo, there must be another Kevin Palmieri. Something got messed up. There's no way I'm supposed to be on the show. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And this was like 6 months ago. This was recent. So what I did was I looked at the most recent and relevant proof. So I'm sitting there. Okay, what is the most recent and relevant proof that proves me wrong in this moment? Well, the most recent relevant proof was a podcast I went on last week with somebody who had a PhD in psychology, and I thought I was way out of my league, but it was amazing. Oh, okay, let me go do this. So I really think that action is the cure-all when it comes to fear chasing, when it comes to imposter syndrome. I think imposter syndrome is just fear at the end of the day. It's fear that people are going to find out the biggest fear that we have about ourselves, and they're going to think that fear is accurate and right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially in leadership positions, they want to be right most of the time. They want to know the most stuff. They want to have the most knowledge about their certain areas. And when that doesn't happen, that's sometimes hard to swallow. And I think that has a little bit to do with how people interact with each other at the workplace or, in life in general. People want to be right. And when they're not, it's hard to swallow. And I think that's where the door can be opened a little bit for the struggle of imposter syndrome and things like that. How does someone know if they have it, that imposter syndrome? How do they know? What are some red flags they can look for within themselves?
So I'm even at the stage now where I think imposter syndrome is a good thing, believe it or not. So I would say maybe it's not a red flag, maybe it's a green flag, or it's just an awareness. But you're afraid to really share because you're afraid that someone is going to take what you share and prove it wrong, making you look bad. I think that's one piece. You stay quiet even though you know the answer to something, because deep down you're afraid you might be wrong and people will look at you differently. Those are two big ones. You don't try something because you're more afraid of the result and the judgment that will come with it than the lessons that will come along with it. Those are big ones. And then just the self-talk of, if every time you're getting ready to do something, and maybe you've done this many times before, you have that voice in your head that says, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, people are going to know, you're not valuable enough, this coaching session's not going to be good for this person, all of that stuff. When those negative thoughts creep up, I think a good place to look is, okay, is this imposter syndrome? Is this me having a position that I don't think I deserve? Because if you think of the opposite of imposter syndrome might be entitlement, where you think you deserve the position by default. So it's almost that. It's almost just hyper humble, self-deprecating self-talk that's causing you to question yourself and everything that you're doing, even though at times you might have proof that would disprove those thoughts.
I think the humility piece that you just mentioned, that's a very delicate balance with a leader, because you have to be confident, but nobody latches on to what you're saying. Nobody follows somebody that just thinks they're right all the time and doesn't have a lot of humility. So there's a balance between humility and confidence. And sometimes that's hard to balance as a leader when you're having those interactions day to day with the people that you lead. So in the world of athletics, which is my realm, we often tell athletes that, you don't have to worry about what's on the scoreboard. You don't have to worry about those doubts you have, or, the negative thoughts you have about the competition coming up, because you have done everything you can to prepare for that event. How does that kind of align with dealing with imposter syndrome, and not necessarily in sports, but just in life in general, how does that preparation piece either help or guide somebody to deal with imposter syndrome?
I think there's physical preparation where you're putting your body through stuff. Okay, I know this drill, I know this play, I know how to throw this pitch, whatever it is. I've practiced this pitch enough. But it's more of the mental training of when you're the closer and it's the ninth inning and there's the bases are loaded and it's a tie game. That's when things really start to come in. So it's really the mental training of, okay, when I am in positions of stress, when I am in positions of doubt, how do I react? And if you can prep for that in advance, because there's usually tells, right? Maybe it's an elevated heart rate. Maybe you sweat more, right? When I speak, I sweat through my clothes. It is mayhem. It's the worst thing ever. But now that I know that, I can start to recognize it, and my day of preparation might be different. So there's the physical preparation of, I want to make sure I'm in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. But the mental preparation of, I want to make sure I'm thinking about the right thing at the right time in the right way. I want to make sure when I do get any negative thoughts, I squish them and pass that on to something positive. And I think you can prep for real life moments throughout the rest of moments, the rest of life, day to day, in school, in class, at work, because it's the same mind. You have the same thoughts. It's just less stressful to do it when there isn't a lot on the line. So physically, most people know what to do. I think it's that mental thing of, okay, what if I do this wrong? What if I look bad? What if the person gets a hit, whatever it may be? I think it's that inner game, the inner game versus the outer game. And you see this with high level athletes. High level athletes have very, very, very short memories. They throw an interception, almost lose the game, and then they drive down the field and win the game. There's very little imposter syndrome in very, very, very high level athletes' lives. But if you were to take them out of that environment, there probably is imposter syndrome somewhere. Maybe it's cooking, or maybe they're the face of a brand and they don't know anything about business. There's definitely room to experiment with somewhere in our lives. We just have to figure out where it is.
Yeah. So I know you touched on it a little bit, but what causes deep down, we talked about I don't feel this, I don't feel this. What do you think causes imposter syndrome at the end of the day? Is it the outcomes that come from those experiences, or is it the just lack of experience? What causes it at the root of an imposter syndrome?
We have something we've called the drive to 5, where some people are. So if you're under 5, you might be someone who lacks self-belief. Maybe you have lower self-worth. You doubt yourself. If you're above 5, you might hinge on arrogant. You might have delusionally high self-worth. You might have super, super high self-belief. From what I've seen, most of the time that we're dealing with imposter syndrome, it's usually someone who lacks confidence. That's usually what it is. Results don't really even matter. It's not really a thing where if you get more results, it'll go away, because you have a weird way of tricking yourself into thinking, well, I just got lucky again, or I'm getting lucky more. So I think one of the things is just self-doubt, wherever that comes from. It could be, I always paint the picture of this. Two children. One child is raised in a family where they're told, you're more than enough, you're amazing, you're going to be successful, you're beautiful, handsome, intelligent, the sky's the limit, the world is your oyster. I doubt they're going to have the same level of imposter syndrome versus someone who is born into something of, you're terrible, you're not enough, you'll never be smart enough, you'll never be good enough, you're not athletic, you're shy, blah, 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 blah. That's just building in scarcity, that's building in fear, that's building in uncertainty, and probably building in imposter syndrome. So I would say that it's the scarcity. It's the scarcity mindset versus a growth mindset, a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. A growth mindset is, I'm not there yet, but I can be there eventually. I think a fixed mindset is more, I'm not there now, and I don't think I ever can be. I would say those are kind of the two big pillars.
So do you think that if someone knows they're struggling with imposter syndrome, do they have a low sense of self-awareness, or is it due to some other aspect of their lives?
I would say they probably just haven't put enough effort into whatever it is that they have imposter syndrome for. Because, like I said earlier, I don't think imposter syndrome is a bad thing. I think imposter syndrome is a good thing because it suggests that you're pushing the outer boundaries of what you're capable of. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. It's just, it kind of keeps us stuck if we don't try to push them. So if you have imposter syndrome, you might have imposter syndrome forever to some degree, but it's only because you're pushing things further and further and further and further, and you're working less in your competence and more in uncertainty. So at the beginning, no, I don't necessarily know if it matters whether or not you have high or low self-awareness. I think if you have high action, you're probably going to be better off because you might still experience imposter syndrome, but you'll get better results because you'll actually do the things that you're scared of. It's almost the thought of somebody who doesn't like a certain food will never try a certain food, therefore not knowing if they even like the food. They just, in their mind, they've determined they don't like it. So now they have this whole thing built around it. Well, oysters are slimy and this and this and this, which they look that way, but you might end up liking it, but you'll never know unless you take action on it. So yeah, I think action. Somebody who is not taking action is reinforcing the fact that they have imposter syndrome and they're not good enough.
So what if somebody isn't the highest performer or the most talented? You know, there's always somebody that outperforms you or is more talented than you. Maybe I don't exhibit the best leadership qualities, but I do have a growth mindset and I want to be better at it. You know, how do I fight that imposter syndrome and realize that, hey, I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to get there. I'm making an active effort. And how do I fight that imposter syndrome from getting in?
Attach yourself to someone who can bring you someplace you aren't, I won't say capable, you're not comfortable going yourself. One of the best things ever for me is I have a business partner who has zero of this. He has zero imposter syndrome. He thinks he can do anything. He believes in himself more than anybody I've ever met. I've been, quote unquote, invited to places that I never would have gone without him, which forced me to look in the mirror and say, you can hold a conversation in a room of strangers. You're going to be fine. You just have never done it like this before. That's why you're freaking out. And you think everyone is thinking, oh, this guy can't hold a conversation, when in reality, they're scared of their own stuff. They're not worried about me. They have their own lives going on. So I love to use the phrase borrow belief. If you can borrow belief from someone, you're going to be in a really good place because they're going to force you outside of your proverbial comfort zone. That's one. The other thing is set goals that force you to grow. Being good at something is a great goal, but being good at something and getting this, and this result is going to force you to do stuff that you never would have had the necessity to do before. But I really think the first one, if you can attach yourself to someone who doesn't deal with the struggles that you deal with, you're going to get to a really good place. That requires vulnerability. That's kind of been a couple, we've talked about that a couple times here, but vulnerability is a big piece of it too, because if you go to someone and you say, hey, I'm afraid of this and I have imposter syndrome in situations like this, can you help me? Is there any, what would you do if you were in my situation? You seem to make it look so easy. They might be able to bring you in kind of for a test run, have you put training wheels on, and then you can get exposure to what it is that you're afraid of without necessarily the same level of fear or pain coming to you.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the effects that you've seen imposter syndrome have on somebody? Maybe they've been dealing with it for a long time, or maybe they've just been dealing with it over the last year or so. What are some of the negative effects that you've seen that have on leaders specifically?
They are really good at beating themselves up. They're challenged with looking at the wins, but they're very quick to look at the losses. Those are two big ones. Sometimes you get stuck in what we call lonely land because everybody looks at you a certain way, but you don't look at yourself that way. So you can't really own the way other people look at you. So it builds this wall between you and whoever you're leading because they think you're amazing, but you don't think you're amazing. So it's this weird place to be. can hurt the possibility of being vulnerable, because being vulnerable is super scary for sure. And going back to what we said earlier, it can kind of facilitate two lives. It can facilitate the life you have as a leader when you're in your organization, and then the life you have at home. You're not going to talk about you as a leader the same way if you feel like an imposter when you're leading. It's almost like, let me check the box and let me get out of here for the day. Let me go retool, and then I'll just figure it out again tomorrow. It's that. Another thing I see often is lack of certainty. So if you give someone advice or you give someone an answer, you might say, well, I don't know, maybe that's it. I think that might work. Maybe that will help, versus knowing exactly what the answer is and saying, this is what I did, and this is what I've taught to other people, or this is what was taught to me, and this is what worked really well. As a leader, obviously, we know certainty is super important to deliver because people follow through with certainty. So that's another big one, is just lack of certainty, which then creates lack of influence, which then creates lack of results, unfortunately.
So switching gears here a little bit, say I'm a leader and I'm noticing some of those things with one or more of my employees. I see them as doing a really good job. They're pretty hard on themselves. They're dealing with imposter syndrome. You can see it. What can I as a leader do to help them fight that?
I would say give them an opportunity to gently fail. Maybe counterintuitive to what you might think, but give them an opportunity to get to a place where they kind of can't succeed and they have a very, very small micro failure, so they can see that failure does not necessarily have to prove the way they feel about themselves, and then help them get up and try it again. So for us, we had this thing one year, this is like 3 or 4 years ago. We do live events every quarter. And many of the individuals on our team did not identify as someone who could do anything in terms of sales. They had imposter syndrome around selling anything. I could never sell anything. I could never do that. So we said, we're not going to reward who sells the most tickets. We're going to reward who gets the most failures. Whoever gets the most no's, we're going to give you a $100 Amazon gift card. I just want to reiterate the fact that your effort is valuable. And if we can take your effort and then we can help you with the mindset piece, you get to the place where you realize, okay, number one, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Number two, maybe I'm actually better at this than I thought. And number three, I am going to reward my effort more than the results, because the results aren't really going to help us. The results, if we're already getting results and we have imposter syndrome, we have to start by rewarding aligned effort, aware effort, intentional effort. So that is what I would say. Those three. Let someone fail gently. Really, really help them figure out what the process is for them. What is the effort? And then when they have an opportunity for failure, pick them up, show them the lessons in that, and then give them another opportunity to do the same thing.
Good stuff. So in doing those three things, you're essentially, they might not see it right now, but you're empowering that employee at the end of the day. So how can a leader best empower the people that they lead and, eliminate any shred of imposter syndrome?
So just to touch on what we were talking about, as a leader, you get to the place where you understand, for lack of better phrasing, how much hand-holding someone needs. There's someone on your team that you're going to need to put more time, energy, effort, and focus into, 100%. But there's other people where they're ready for you to take the training wheels off, but you kind of have to do that because they're not going to tell you. They're not going to say, you know what, I feel like I'm ready. Some will. But you as a leader, you have to know the team so well where okay, Brittany's someone who jumps before she is ready to. So we're going to be fine with Brittany. Okay, cool. Christina, sometimes she gets stuck. All right, so let's give her an opportunity, and then let's make sure someone's there to support her. I told my business partner this recently. I said, when I knew I was growing and when I knew my imposter syndrome in business, at least, was going away, it's when I stopped asking you to look over my work before I sent it over to a potential client. I felt like I'm at the stage where I would rather this person say no and me do it myself than them say yes and me ask you for help. And that was such a powerful thing for me to realize. I've been working a lot on self-awareness, so I think that's the reason I saw that. But I'm sure if that didn't happen, Alan at some point would have said, dude, just send it. Just start sending the emails and let's just see what happens. That would have been very beneficial for me. So as a leader, knowing the people that you're leading, understanding their unique strengths, their unique weaknesses, what they're afraid of, what they're drawn to, their limiting beliefs, their blocks, all of that stuff, that'll allow you to say, you know what, you're fine. Let's just start doing this, and just give them grace in the fact that they might not be getting, again, they might not be getting the results yet, but the effort is replicable. And when you replicate the effort, the results will come eventually, as long as you're on a positive path.
I was talking with Kyle Gillette. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was on one of my previous episodes, and we were talking a little bit about that empowerment piece. And he told a story about a leader who always, and a lot of people do this, they always put their Superman cape on when there's a problem, and they think that, oh, there's a problem, I got to handle it, I got to do this, I got to do this. But really what empowers you employees is the most, he said, was 4 words. What do you think? And it sounds so simple, but if somebody comes to you with a problem, start out by asking them, what do they think about that situation? They're going to immediately feel empowered and heard and valued, and they're going to feel like a valued member of the organization. So yeah, I think that was a very good piece of the empowerment aspect of in your organization. So I want to switch gears again a little bit. I want to get into kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis, and I want to hear a little bit about the Next Level University and what you guys do through the podcasting platform and how it helps people.
Yeah. So on the day-to-day, I am doing a lot of this. I am a natural introvert. You would probably never know it because I'm on camera and on interviews and coaching calls. So my day is usually wake up, work out, go do jujitsu, back office time, and then public facing from 11 to 6, 7, 8, depending on the day. And then at least an hour and a half, 2 hours with my wife at night. But it really is, it's mostly podcasting, business meetings, and coaching. So we do an episode every single day. So that adds up, obviously. I have 50 some odd clients I'm coaching at least. So there's a lot going on there. Next Level University is a podcast, but there's a business under it. So we do an episode every single day. That's the podcast. But underneath that, we have free courses and paid courses and group coaching and one-on-one coaching. And we have a podcast department that we produce podcasts, and we have a social media department. We do live events. We do virtual events. We do retreats. We do so many different things. So at the end of the day, the simplest version, the simplest form is, no matter what your self-improvement set point is or your financial set point, there is somewhere for you. We do an episode every day because if I'm going to tell you, you have an opportunity to get a little bit better every day, I better be there leading and showing you how to do it, right? Let me lead by example. But we also have people who are business owners who want to grow their businesses, and they come to the bottom of the business and pay us money to help them do it. So no matter what, there is a spot for you. And that is really why we created this at the end of the day.
So kind of wrapping up here, give my listeners, maybe I'm listening to this and I'm like, man, this is speaking to me. I really need to make some changes and become more aware and deal with my imposter syndrome. What words of encouragement would you have somebody that's kind of, stagnant or stuck, or they're feeling over their head? What kind of words of encouragement would you have for somebody like that?
I said this to a client the other day. I said, you know the answer already. You're just looking at me to approve it. You already know what you should be doing. You're just waiting for me to tell you. If you feel like you have imposter syndrome or limiting beliefs, you're doubting yourself or any of that stuff, there is an action that you should probably be taking. Maybe it's jumping up a position that you don't think you're ready for yet. If you have a growth mindset, you're listening to a podcast like this, you most likely do, you're probably way better off than you realize. The problem is me telling you that doesn't do anything. you going out there and proving the negative parts of you wrong and the positive parts of you right, that's the way to do it. And it will take time. It will take days, weeks, months, and years, but you're going to be more successful. You're going to be more well-rounded. And as you push the boundaries of what you're capable of, you're going to get more results. I can't promise it'll go away. It hasn't gone away from me. So if I promise that, I would be lying. I don't know. I don't know if it ever will, but we can turn it into a positive thing. That means I'm growing. If I stop getting imposter syndrome, that means I'm comfortable with everything I'm doing. That means I'm not really growing anymore. So even if we could reformulate imposter syndrome is holding me back because, maybe we could say, well, imposter syndrome is something that I could push outward because I'm willing to lean into it, grow, evolve, become more aware, and then get better results because of it all.
Good stuff.
Thank you, my friend.
Well, I like to end most of my episodes with some just rapid fire questions, just to give my listeners a better idea about you and get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
So first question, you mentioned you were a baseball player, as was I. What position did you play?
Shortstop, and then eventually second.
Okay. I was a pitcher because I was left-handed, and I like to say that was my claim to fame. That was my easy route. I was left-handed and could throw a baseball. So, so what do you like to do on your time off?
Some sort of exercise. So yeah, I'm big into jiu-jitsu. I watch mixed martial arts every weekend it's on. So you'll find my butt on the couch from whatever time it is, 6 till 1 in the morning. I'm there. I love fitness. So I'm a bodybuilder at heart. And then I also love writing music. I write raps and music as well.
Cool. Who's your favorite UFC fighter?
I would say probably Dustin Poirier. I'm a big fan. Somewhat humble, but also super confident, and just, he's a dog. He's got that dog in him. I respect it. Anybody
that can beat Conor McGregor twice, yes. I think you're legit. So.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on today, and I learned a lot from this. I hope my listeners did as well, and hopefully this helps somebody out there. That's the whole goal of this. And imposter syndrome is real, and I think there's, like you said, you can make a positive thing out of a negative situation, and I hope that our listeners can take some things and do that in their lives. So I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to following your work and keeping up with Next Level University.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Bo. Have a wonderful day, and shout out to all the amazing listeners you have.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lead to Win podcast. You can find all of Kevin's links, including info on Next Level University, in the description of this episode if you'd like to connect or want more information. Be sure to set your notifications to receive updates on new episodes of the Lead to Win podcast. It can be found on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts, and a new episode comes out every Tuesday morning. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. Until next time, now go do the work.